Only I came to my husband's funeral. Not our son, not our daughter, not a single grandchild, just me standing by his coffin.
The church pews were empty. The only sounds were the steady drops against the window and the soft creak of my chair as I stood to say goodbye. I kept glancing at the doors, hoping, praying that one of them might walk through. But they never did. My fingers trembled as I placed a white rose on his casket. I whispered, "You deserved better than this, John." The silence that followed was deafening. I tried to remember the last time our family had all been together. It felt like a lifetime ago, laughter in the kitchen, Sunday dinners, his deep voice humming while he carved the roast. Now all that was left was the echo of what once was and me, standing alone among the pews, wondering how love could end up this empty. When the priest finished the last prayer, he turned to me with kind eyes. "Do you want me to call someone to take you home, Mrs. Hayes?" I smiled faintly, shaking my head. "No. I'll walk." The walk home was long and the rain didn't let up. It soaked through my coat and dripped from my hair, but I didn't care. Each step felt like I was walking through years of memories. The bakery where John used to buy me muffins, the park bench where we'd watch the sunrise, the corner store where he'd always forget the milk. Every place we'd shared was now just another reminder that I was walking alone. When I reached the house, the air inside felt different, heavier, colder. His favorite chair sat empty, his slippers still tucked neatly beside it. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, mocking me with its rhythm. Time, it seemed, had no mercy for widows. I made myself a cup of tea, though it tasted like nothing. Then I noticed his mug still on the counter, the one with the chipped handle. For a moment I thought about washing it, but my hands froze. I couldn't. It felt like erasing him. I sat on the couch and stared at the phone. No missed calls. No messages, not even a "sorry, Mom." It hit me then, harder than the rain, harder than the funeral. I had spent my whole life raising a family and somehow I'd ended up invisible to them. I thought about Emily, my daughter, who hadn't spoken to me since the argument about her father's care. And Michael, my son, who was always too busy. Busy with what? Busy forgetting the people who built him. My throat tightened. The tears came quietly, one by one, sliding down my face and into the cup of untouched tea. And in that silence, I spoke softly to the empty room. "John, I hope you can forgive me for not keeping them together." The wind howled outside, as if the world itself was answering. I closed my eyes, listening. For a second, just a second, I swore I heard his voice again. "You've still got more living to do, Margaret." I smiled through the tears. "Then I'll try," I whispered. "For you." The house was too quiet. I wandered through it like a ghost, touching the framed photos, the half-read books, the coat still hanging by the door. Every piece of him lingered, and every piece of me shattered a little more. I ended up in the kitchen again, standing at the window, staring at the rain running down the glass like endless goodbyes. And that's when I saw it, the mailbox across the street. The little red flag was up, a letter. I grabbed my coat and stepped back into the storm. The rain stung my skin, but I barely felt it. When I opened the box, there it was, an envelope, soggy and bent at the corners, addressed in familiar handwriting. It was from Michael. My heart stopped. I tore it open right there in the rain, hands shaking. The ink was smudged, but I could still read the words. "Mom, I'm sorry. There's something I need to tell you. Please don't be alone tomorrow. I'm coming home." My knees went weak. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than sorrow. Hope, fragile, trembling hope. I pressed the letter to my chest, whispering, "John, maybe our boy finally remembers." But as I looked closer, I noticed the postmark. The letter wasn't from yesterday. It was dated 3 weeks ago. The hope inside me cracked. Why hadn't he come? Where was he now? Lightning flashed across the sky, and for a heartbeat, I saw my reflection in the window, a woman caught between grief and questions too heavy for one heart to carry. I didn't know it then, but that single letter, soaked and late, would open a door to something far darker than loneliness. Because sometimes the people who disappear don't stay gone, and the ones you mourn might not be the ones who truly need saving. When I came home from the funeral, the house felt like a stranger's, familiar walls, unfamiliar silence. His chair was still by the fireplace, his slippers neatly lined beside it, his reading glasses resting on the table where he'd last placed them. Everything exactly as he left it, except him. I walked through each room slowly, afraid to disturb the stillness. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, echoing like whispers of a life that had gone too quiet. The kettle on the counter caught my eye. I'd left it half full that morning before the funeral. I turned it on out of habit, even though I wasn't thirsty. Sometimes you just need to hear something alive in the house, even if it's just the sound of boiling water. When the whistle began to hum, I picked up the phone and dialed my eldest son, Mark. He answered after the third ring, his voice bright and careless, music playing in the background. "Mom, can I call you later? We're at a friend's place, it's game night." For a second, I couldn't speak. Then I said softly, "Mark, your father's funeral was today." There was silence on the other end, long enough to almost sound like guilt. Then came a quick, uneasy laugh. "Oh, yeah, right, I meant to come, but you know how things get. We'll visit next week, okay?" Before I could say another word, the line went dead. I sat there, holding the phone against my ear, listening to the hollow sound of nothing. Next week. There wouldn't be a next week for his father. I tried calling my daughter Lily next. No answer. I waited an hour before her message finally arrived. "Sorry, Mom, we had a brunch with friends, couldn't miss it. Hope everything went fine." Fine, her father's farewell, fine. I placed the phone face down on the table and stared at the wall. The silence began to pulse, heavy and alive, wrapping itself around me like smoke. I looked at the family portrait above the mantel, the one we took years ago when the kids were still young. Mark had jam on his chin, Lily was holding John's arm, and I was laughing at something the photographer said. Back then, we were a family that promised to never drift apart. Now we were strangers linked only by memories that no one else seemed to care about anymore. The clock ticked loudly. Each sound was a reminder that the world outside kept moving, that somewhere my children were laughing, living, forgetting. I poured myself some tea, but it tasted like dust. Everything did. Even the air felt hollow. When night fell, I found myself drawn to his chair, the old one with the worn-out leather arms. I sat there and pulled one of his sweaters around my shoulders. It still smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave. The scent broke me. Tears came slowly at first, then all at once, heavy sobs that I couldn't stop. They fell for the man I'd lost, for the life we built, and for the children who no longer seemed to remember where they came from. I thought about Mark's carefree laughter on the phone, about Lily's text, and something inside me whispered, they don't understand loss yet. Maybe one day, when life takes something precious from them, they'll remember this day. They'll remember how it feels when silence answers where love should have spoken. But for now, all I could do was grieve, not just for my husband, but for the family we used to be. Outside, the rain began again, tapping gently on the window like a ghost come to visit. I stared at the dark sky and wondered how it all fell apart. When did love turn into convenience? When did family become an obligation, not a bond? The questions had no answers. I reached for his wedding ring, the one I'd kept beside my bed. I slipped it onto my finger and whispered, "They forgot you, John, but I won't." The air grew still. For a moment, I almost felt him there beside me, warm, quiet, comforting. But when I turned my head, there was only the empty chair and the faint sound of thunder rolling far away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked and sighed like it, too, was mourning. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the framed photos, the evidence that once we mattered to someone. In the kitchen, I found an unopened letter tucked beneath a pile of newspapers. It was addressed to me, no return address, no name, just a faint scrawl that looked familiar. I hesitated, then tore it open. "Mom, I'll explain everything soon, just trust me, don't believe what you hear." No signature, but the handwriting, it was Lily's. A chill crept down my spine. What was she talking about? What was there to hear? I folded the note and placed it beside the phone, unease growing inside me. I didn't know it then, but that letter, those few mysterious words, would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. And as I sat there in the dark, staring at the shadows on the wall, I realized something that hurt more than grief ever could. Sometimes the people who forget you aren't really gone. They're just hiding behind truths you're not meant to see. And if you think the loneliness ended there, you're wrong, because what I discovered next would make me question everything I believed about my own children. The morning after the funeral, the house felt heavier than ever, like the walls themselves knew he was gone. I moved slowly through each room, my hands brushing over the things he'd left behind. His reading glasses rested on the nightstand. The crossword puzzle he'd started, half finished, the pen still tucked neatly between the pages. His coat hung by the door, waiting patiently, like it didn't know it would never be worn again. Every corner of that house carried his fingerprints, his warmth, his quiet presence. And yet, it all felt so painfully empty without his voice filling the spaces between. As I touched the edge of his pillow, the memories came rushing back like an old film playing on a loop in my head. I could hear him humming in the kitchen while I made breakfast. I could almost see him pretending to be annoyed when I burned the toast again. "Mary," he'd laugh, "you've burned it so perfectly I might start liking it this way." Those little moments, they were the kind of things you never realize are holy until they're gone. We were never rich, not even close, but we had enough. Enough laughter, enough love, enough hope to make the hard days feel lighter. He worked sunup to sundown just to keep food on the table. When money got tight, he'd skip his own meals so the kids could have seconds. I'd catch him sewing up their shoes late at night, his big hands fumbling with a needle he could barely see. And every time I'd tell him to rest, he'd smile and say, "New shoes can wait, Mary, school can't." That was the kind of man he was, steady, selfless, and silent in his sacrifices. And yet when it came time to say goodbye to him, not one of our children showed up. Not one. The thought clawed at my chest as I sat on the edge of our bed, clutching his old sweater to my chest. It still smelled like him, a mix of coffee, soap, and sawdust. It smelled like comfort. It smelled like home. But the scent was fading just like everything else. The silence in the room wasn't empty, it was alive. Every creak in the floorboards, every tick of the clock sounded like a whisper of everything that was gone. Sometimes I thought I could hear him in those sounds, his voice, low and gentle, calling my name the way he used to when I was lost in thought. I closed my eyes and let the memories play, one after another. Our first home, tiny, drafty, but filled with laughter. The nights when the kids were little and we'd all pile into one bed during thunderstorms because they were scared. His hand always found mine in the dark. Always. Now there was no hand to reach for, just the cold side of the bed and the soft hum of the clock reminding me that time doesn't stop for grief. I pressed my face into his sweater and whispered, "You gave them everything, John, everything." My voice cracked on the last word, and they couldn't even give you goodbye. Tears slid down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. They were the only proof that love was still alive somewhere inside me, even if it was buried under pain. That's when I heard it, not out loud, but deep inside, like a small voice rising up through the noise of my thoughts. "You don't deserve this, Mary." It startled me. For a second, I looked around the room, half expecting to see him standing there, smiling the way he always did when I doubted myself. But it wasn't his voice. It was mine. Fragile, but fierce. A part of me I'd forgotten existed, the part that used to dream, to stand tall, to believe she mattered. I hadn't heard that voice in years, not since the kids moved out. Not since I started tiptoeing around everyone else's comfort, shrinking myself to fit their convenience. Now, standing in the ruins of what once was, I realized something painful and powerful all at once. I had let everyone, even my own children, forget that I was a person too. Not just mom, not just the old lady who cooks, but Mary, the woman who once danced barefoot in the kitchen with her husband, the woman who once had dreams bigger than her fears, the woman who once believed she could weather anything until grief made her doubt her own strength. I looked around the bedroom at the traces of our life together, and a strange calm began to settle over me. Grief hadn't broken me, it had revealed me, because love that deep doesn't disappear, it transforms. And in that transformation, I found something I thought I'd lost forever, my will to fight for myself. I wiped my tears, stood up, and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside glistening and new. The sun peeked weakly through the clouds, and for the first time in weeks, I opened the window wide. The air was cold and crisp, but it felt honest. It smelled like change. As I stood there, breathing it in, the letter I'd found the night before suddenly came back to mind, the one from Lily. Those words. "Don't believe what you hear." A ripple of unease spread through me. What had she meant by that? What was there to hear? Something inside me knew this wasn't over, that my husband's death had left behind more than sorrow. It had left behind secrets. And maybe it was finally time I learned what they were. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried with the people we lose, it lingers in whispers, waiting for the truth to be uncovered. And the truth I was about to discover would change everything I thought I knew about my own family. It was late that night when I opened his drawer. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, maybe just a piece of him I hadn't lost yet. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Dust floated lazily in the air like tiny memories refusing to settle. I pulled the drawer open and began to sift through the familiar clutter, old bills, faded photographs, yellowed receipts. And then, beneath it all, I saw an envelope. My name was written across it. In his handwriting, firm, familiar, and heartbreakingly gentle. For a moment, I just stared at it, afraid that opening it would make him feel even further away, like it would turn his voice into silence. But my heart wouldn't let me leave it unopened. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The scent of old ink and cedar filled the air, and there it was, his voice, captured in the loops and lines of every word. My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, I suppose I couldn't say goodbye the way I wanted to. Don't be sad, my love. You gave me more joy than I ever deserved. I know the children have changed. It hurts me too. But I believe life has its own way of teaching lessons. Don't cry for what's gone, live for what's left. And when you miss me, just sit by the window with your tea. I'll be there in every sunrise you see. Forever yours, John. By the time I reached the end, my vision was a blur. Tears dripped onto the page, smudging his words like raindrops on glass. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered his name over and over as if my voice could bridge the distance between this world and wherever he was. That letter didn't just feel like a goodbye. It felt like a promise, a hand reaching down from heaven, not to comfort me, but to remind me that I wasn't truly alone. For the first time in weeks, I brewed myself a cup of tea just the way he liked it. Strong, no sugar, and I sat by the window exactly where he told me to. Outside, dawn was breaking. The sky glowed softly, pale light creeping through the gray clouds like forgiveness finding its way through pain. And as I sat there, the wind brushed gently against the glass, carrying something that felt almost like his voice. "It's okay, Mary," it whispered. "You're stronger than you think." I smiled through my tears. Maybe he was right. Maybe the kind of love we shared never really leaves, it just changes shape, waiting for us in the quiet moments between heartbeats. As I folded the letter back into the envelope, I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint imprint beneath his signature. Almost like another sheet had once been there. My breath caught. Was there another letter? Or something he didn't want anyone else to see? The thought sent a shiver through me, not of fear, but of curiosity. Because sometimes, even after death, the ones we love still have one last truth to tell. And as the morning light spilled across that letter, I couldn't help but wonder, what if John's words weren't just a goodbye, but a warning? Days turned into weeks after the funeral, but the phone never rang. No messages, no visits, no apologies, just silence, the kind that doesn't echo, it just lingers heavy like dust on forgotten furniture. My children, my own flesh and blood, had vanished into their glittering, busy worlds, leaving me in the quiet ruins of what used to be family. One evening, I picked up the phone and dialed my eldest, Mark. It rang so long that I almost hung up, but then came the sound of his distracted voice. "Mom, oh, hi, sorry, I've been busy." Busy, that word cut deeper than any goodbye ever could. "Busy?" I asked softly. "Your father's things are still here. I thought maybe you'd want to come by, maybe say a proper goodbye." There was a pause, not the kind that meant he was thinking, the kind that meant he was looking for an excuse. "Yeah, maybe next weekend," he said finally. Next weekend never came. I stared at the phone for a long while after he hung up, the silence in the room pressing down like a weight I couldn't lift. It was strange how the same walls that once held laughter now held only my heartbeat. Later that night, I tried Susan, no answer. When I texted her, she replied an hour later. "Mom, I just can't deal with sad stuff right now. You know how emotional I get?" Sad stuff. That's what her father's memory had become, an inconvenience in her calendar. I set the phone down on the table and just stared. The glow of the screen faded, but the ache in my chest didn't. A few days later, I opened my laptop, hoping maybe one of them had changed their mind. Instead, I found a new photo on Susan's page, her and her husband smiling on a beach, drinks in their hands, sun on their faces. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to leave the past behind and chase happiness." Leave the past behind. Was that what John had become to them? Just the past? I closed the laptop slowly and let the darkness fill the room. Not angry. Not bitter, just hollow, like the space beside me in bed that had stayed empty ever since that awful day. The world outside kept spinning, kids laughing down the street, cars passing by, the smell of rain drifting through the window. But mine had stopped the day John's heart did. I looked around the living room, at the framed photos, the worn sofa, the clock that ticked too loudly in the quiet. Every object whispered a story, but none of them were being heard. So I lit a candle on the mantel and placed John's picture beside it. He looked so calm in that photo, the same soft smile that used to melt my anger after every silly argument. I traced his face with my fingertips and whispered, "Looks like it's just you and me again, dear." The flame flickered gently, casting his picture in warm, trembling light. For a second, I could almost feel him there, that quiet strength, that steady warmth that never needed words. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. A realization, small but certain, that love doesn't die just because the people around you forget it. It stays stubborn and beautiful inside the heart that refuses to let go. As the candlelight danced, wrapping the room in a soft, golden glow, I smiled faintly through my tears. Because even if my children had abandoned their roots, I would never abandon love itself. But as I blew out the candle, I noticed something strange. The photo, it had shifted slightly as if someone had touched it. A chill ran through me. Was it just the wind, or was John still trying to tell me something I hadn't yet heard? And as the flame faded into smoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that his story, our story, wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when the phone finally rang. At first, I didn't even recognize the sound. After weeks of silence, it felt foreign, almost intrusive, slicing through the stillness of the house like an echo that didn't belong anymore. I sat there for a moment, frozen, watching the phone buzz across the table. For the briefest second, I let myself hope. Maybe it was one of the children. Maybe someone finally remembered that I was still here. I reached for it, my hand trembling. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a calm, unfamiliar voice. "Mrs. Thompson?" "Yes, who's this?" "This is Father Ellis," the man said gently, "from St. Mary's Parish." St. Mary's, my breath caught. That was where John and I were married 40 years ago, under the same high arches that echoed with our vows, our laughter, our promises. Hearing that name felt like someone had opened a window inside my chest. "Yes, Father," I whispered. He hesitated before speaking again, his tone heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "I met your son Mark yesterday." My heart stopped for a moment. "Mark," I repeated softly. "My son Mark, yes. He came to the church," the priest said quietly. "He seemed lost." Lost. That word lingered. It wrapped around my heart, squeezing, aching, because that was the boy I remembered, the one who used to get lost in grocery stores and cry until I found him. Only this time I couldn't reach out my hand to guide him back. I swallowed hard. "He went to the church?" "Yes," Father Ellis replied. He sat alone for nearly an hour, right in the second pew, just staring at the altar. He didn't say much, but he looked broken. The image hit me like a wave, my grown son sitting in the same church where his father and I once said I do, shoulders heavy, eyes lowered. For the first time in months, I felt something stir inside me. Not anger, not bitterness. Hope, small, fragile, trembling, but alive. Did he say anything before he left?" I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, softly, the priest said, he whispered, "I think I failed my father and my mother." I pressed my hand to my mouth, the phone shaking between my fingers. My heart broke and mended in the same beat. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The only sound was the rain tapping gently against the window, steady, relentless, like time itself reminding me that some hearts only wake up when it's too late. "Thank you, Father," I finally whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me." He sighed quietly. "Grief changes people, Mrs. Thompson. Sometimes it takes silence to make them listen to what their soul's been saying all along." When I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time, the words still echoing through my mind. "I think I failed my father and my mother." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a confession, but it was the start of something I hadn't felt in so long, the possibility of healing. That night, the rain didn't stop. It poured harder, beating against the roof, seeping into the corners of the house like the past refusing to let go. I stood by the window, holding the curtain aside, watching the water stream down the glass. Somewhere out there, my son was wandering through that same rain, maybe thinking of his father, maybe replaying the choices he couldn't undo. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward him, just sorrow and a quiet, motherly ache. I whispered softly to no one and everyone, maybe this is how forgiveness begins, not with apologies, but with realization. The thunder rumbled in the distance, low and deep, like the heavens agreeing. I turned from the window and walked to the mantel where John's photograph still stood. The candle beside it had long burned out, but I lit it again. The flame wavered weakly before casting a gentle glow across his face. "Oh, John," I murmured, "you'd be proud of him. He's finally looking for the light again." The flame flickered brighter for just a second, and I smiled through my tears. Maybe I was imagining it, or maybe love never really leaves, it just changes shape. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the same window, and let the rhythm of the rain fill the silence. Each drop that hit the glass sounded like a heartbeat, slow, steady, patient. And in that moment, I realized something John had always known. Love doesn't demand perfection. It just waits quietly, faithfully, for the lost to find their way home. I leaned back in the chair, whispering to the shadows, "If you can hear me, Mark, come home, son. It's not too late." Outside, the storm softened. The thunder grew distant and the rain began to ease as if the world itself was exhaling. But even as the quiet settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Because storms don't come without purpose. They wash away, they cleanse, they prepare. And somewhere in that long, sleepless night, a thought began to form, faint but certain. Perhaps the rain wasn't a curse after all. Perhaps it was God's way of saying that new beginnings often come dressed as goodbyes. I blew out the candle and whispered one last prayer before bed. "Bring him back to me, Lord. Let this storm end where forgiveness begins." And as I closed my eyes, the faintest light broke through the curtains, the first hint of dawn. The night was ending, but deep down, I knew the story between a mother and her son was only just beginning again. Because sometimes when the rain stops, that's when the truth finally knocks on the door. Spring arrived quietly that year. No grand entrance, no sudden burst of color, just a gentle warmth that crept back into the air, shy and soft, like forgiveness itself. The lilacs had begun to bloom again, painting the garden in soft purples. The same garden John and I had planted decades ago. He'd dig, I'd water, and we'd always end up arguing about where the sun hit best. Now the sunlight seemed to fall exactly where he used to stand. That morning, I was watering the plants on the porch when I heard the crunch of gravel under tires. A car slowed near the gate, and for a heartbeat, my old heart forgot how to beat. The door opened, and there he was, Mark, my son. He stood there holding a bouquet of white lilies, John's favorite. His hair was a little grayer now, his shoulders heavier, but his eyes, oh, his eyes were the same ones that used to look up at me when he'd scraped his knee, asking if I could make it better. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath, even the wind went still. Then, with a shaky smile, he said the two words I had been waiting months, maybe years, to hear. "Hi, Mom." My throat tightened. "Hi, son." He took a hesitant step forward, clutching the flowers as if they might fall apart in his hands. "Mom," his voice broke before he could finish. "I'm sorry for everything. I should have been there." I felt my eyes sting, but I managed a faint smile. "You're here now, Mark, that's what matters." He looked down, guilt flickering across his face like shadows on water. "I saw Dad in my dreams last week," he murmured. He didn't say anything, he just looked disappointed. I reached out, resting my hand on his arm, the same arm that once clung to me as a boy on his first day of school. "Your father wasn't disappointed, Mark," I said softly. "He was just waiting like I was." His breath caught. "Waiting? Yes," I said, my voice steady now. "Love doesn't vanish when someone leaves this world, it waits, it forgives. It always finds its way home." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "Susan wants to come next weekend. She said she's finally ready." A warmth spread through me, the kind of warmth that forgiveness brings after a long, bitter winter. Maybe this was it. Maybe grief had finally done its work. We stood there on the porch for a while, saying nothing, but the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of unspoken words, of love quietly rebuilding itself, one heartbeat at a time. That Sunday, we went together to visit John's grave. The cemetery was peaceful, wrapped in sunlight and birdsong. The grass had grown thick and green over the months, the kind of green that only comes after rain. Mark knelt down and placed the lilies gently on the grave. I watched as his fingers lingered there, as if he wanted to hold onto something he could never touch again. I reached out and traced the words carved into the stone, words I'd chosen myself. Loved deeply, forgave easily. My throat tightened. I could almost hear John's laugh in the breeze, low and warm, teasing me. "You always did have a way with words, Mary." Mark stood beside me, quiet, his shoulders trembling. "I don't know if he can hear me," he said softly, "but I need to say it anyway." He took a deep breath, his voice cracking. "Dad, I'm sorry, I was selfish. I forgot what mattered, but I'll make it right. I promise." I turned to him, tears streaming freely now. "He heard you, son. He's been listening all along." We stood there together, mother and son, beneath the same open sky where grief had once lived and where peace was finally learning to breathe. As we walked back to the car, Mark's voice broke the silence. "Mom," he said, "how did you stay so strong through all of this? After losing Dad after us?" He looked at me, searching as if he needed the answer to keep living. I stopped and turned toward the horizon. The sunlight was breaking through the clouds, spilling gold over everything. And in that light, I saw John not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a part of everything still alive. I smiled softly and whispered, "Because love, my son, is stronger than absence. And forgiveness, that's what keeps the living alive." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. He just nodded, quietly wiping his eyes, and for the first time since his father's funeral, I saw peace in his face. As we reached the car, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of lilies and lilacs, John's favorites. The flowers rustled softly behind us, almost like a blessing. Mark opened the door for me and said, half laughing through his tears, "Dad would have said I finally did something right today." I chuckled. He would have said, "Took you long enough." We both laughed, and it felt like sunlight breaking after a long, endless storm. That night after Mark left, I sat on the porch alone with a cup of tea. The stars were just beginning to appear, faint, trembling dots scattered across the velvet sky. I thought about everything. The loneliness, the silence, the rain, the pain, and how somehow it had all led to this moment, a quiet redemption. I whispered to the night, "Thank you, John, for not letting me give up. For teaching me that love never truly ends, it just waits to be found again." The wind stirred the chimes above me, their soft music echoing through the stillness. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I felt surrounded by memory, by forgiveness, by love that refused to die. I leaned back in my chair, smiled through the tears, and whispered, "This was your last lesson, wasn't it? That even when hearts break, love rebuilds." The stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if agreeing. And in that soft, golden silence, I realized a mother's greatest strength isn't in how long she holds on, but in how deeply she forgives when everyone else has let go. But sometimes, even after peace returns, life has one more surprise waiting, one last reminder that love never truly leaves, it just changes form. Stay with me for the next story, only on Grandma Stories.